Okay, everyone, we are now going to work on the macronutrient analysis assignment. And this is going to focus on carbs, fats, and protein, which are our three macronutrients. You're going to use your food diaries that we've already graded and reviewed, same 3 days, and your nutrient averages calculations that I've already graded as well to answer all these questions about the nutrients within each macronutrient section. Okay, so for example, we'll look at your total carbs, what percent of calories. We'll look at fiber, added sugar, um, protein. We want to do some math, so calculating your needs and how close were you to eating the goal that you need, or is it too much? So we're looking at protein based on weight. And then we're also going to look at fat and different healthy fats versus some fats that we want less of in the diet. So we're looking at the macronutrients as a whole. Okay, so the first question I ask, or the first section is carbohydrates, and I look at kind of quizzing you. Do you know what the AMDR for carbs is? So this was reviewed in chapter 1. So if you need a review, go back and look at the AMDRs. I ask you to insert your response here. Please notice that I have it in blue because I need to see a distinction between your responses and the question. So when I say enter response here, you could just highlight it and you can type in your response and it'll remain blue. Or if you want to use a different color that I can see, I give dark blue or red as options for you, but you're using the text box to enter your responses. This is in Word, so again, you want to use your free access to Office 365 that we talked about for the last assignment. Okay, so these are just questions. So then the question number 2 says, what percent of total calories did carbohydrates provide during your reporting period? This would be found on your nutrient averages calculation sheet. So this is already done for you, or you already did it. Percent of calories from carbs, I asked for your average, and that's the final column. So you would use 46.7. I like to keep it to 1/10 over, so one decimal place over. So 46.7, which would be your response. That means that 46.7% of your total calories came from carbs. Now, in your mind, you're thinking, well, does that fit? Am I in line with the AMDR? That's your question to answer to yourself. Hopefully you are and you're getting the right amount. If it's too high, then it's too much. That means you're not getting enough fat or protein because those are going to be low if carbs are too high. So we're looking at calories and what percent came from each macronutrient. What I really want to show you, because a lot of this will ask sort of the same type of question. So for example, I'll say, take a look at your sugars. It could be added sugar because I do focus on, are you getting too much sugar in your diet? It's not a nutrient. It's in foods that many people are getting too much of. It's tied to many chronic diseases. It's tied to an increase in body fat, increase in blood triglyceride levels. So there's a reason why I want you to assess your sugar intake. And then I ask questions like, well, if you were too high, what food should you get rid of? Or what should you eat less of? Or maybe your sugar was fine for the 3 days that you tracked, but do you need to make any other changes? So this question isn't optional, like question 4, it's not optional. Everyone has to answer it. And you could say like, no, I think my sugar's fine. I don't overindulge in added sugars. If I crave something sweet, I have fruit instead. So you could just give a response to this. But let me show you how to use your food diaries to find sources of the nutrients, or in this case, sugar, an ingredient, and the amounts that are in the foods that you ate. Okay, so this will take us back to Chronometer. So you're logged into Chronometer and you could see a food diary. So we're going to use the same 3 days and you're going to look and see the sugars. So for sugar, this is your first day, so whatever date that was, you're going to hover your mouse over this line that will show. Let me scroll down a bit so you could see. So sugars, notice on this day, 25 grams of sugar came from airheads. So you would say on day one, I'm going to go back. Day one, airheads, and 25 grams. So I'll put that as an example. Airheads, 25 grams. So it's one for each day. Then I would go back to Chronometer and I would check out my day two. And here's day two. And again, I hover and I see Snickers. Whoa, 27 grams. So I would go back and enter that. Snickers, 27 grams. And then you would do the same on for your third day. What was your highest source of sugar? I did not separate in this question added sugar. I just said total sugars. Because you can take a look to see is most of my sugars added or natural. And that makes a difference. Okay, the next one is sort of asking the same thing, but I have to explain this in the food diaries. When I say how many grams of fiber, for example, did you have, and what was your percent of DRI or goal, I'll show you what that means. You should all know what DRIs are. We learned that in chapter 1. So every nutrient has an amount that has been determined through a lot of research each person needs. So that's your DRI or your daily goal. So if I go back, we've already calculated these in our nutrient averages. So I would go to fiber. My average was 11.7 grams, and my percent of goal was 35.7%. Make sure you're using units. So I am going to type in 11.67, grams, and it was, I have no memory, I'm going back, 35.7% of goal. Now, is 35.7% good? It's really low. That means, remember, we're looking for 100%, and I always say 80% or more is good. If you think about grades, 80% or higher is a B or an A. This is a low F, F for fiber. Okay, so not good. Then I ask, again, sort of like the sugar, what were the 3 sources of fiber that you had, the highest one for each day? We would go back to our food diaries. Same thing, you hover over fiber, and I would see on day 1, I had a sorbet and it was 8.5 grams, so I would write that in. Then I would go to day 2, and I would see my list. A bean burrito with cheese was 4.8. That was my highest on the second day. And then I could go to the third day and do the same thing. Okay? Again, it's kind of a repeat. You're going to do the same for omega-3s, 6s, saturated fat. The one I want to go over here is your top food sources of total fat. So I want to know of the foods that you consume that were high in fat, what were the total grams? How many grams were saturated? How many were mono? And how many were poly? Now, one thing to note is that remember what we learned in chapter 5 and chapter 2 when we talk about labels, that mono and polyunsaturated fats are optional for food manufacturers. So sometimes the databases will have 0 for mono and poly. You may see that and you're like, well, this doesn't add up to my total. That makes sense because they don't have to include that information. For now, it's voluntary for food manufacturers to include mono and poly, but they have to include trans and saturated. I didn't ask about trans fats because most of them are relatively negligible nowadays, but saturated fat is an area that we are concerned about. So I do want to know, are you getting foods that are really high in saturated fat? So how you find this is go to your food diaries. You go to the fat section and again hover and you'll see that the bean burrito was 17.2 grams of fat. So that's what I would type in here. So I'm going to type in bean. So it's the cheese probably, right? And if these beans were fried, then that's going to increase the fat amount. Now I already forgot what my number was, so I'm going back. It was 17.2 grams. Okay, so then you ask, well, how do I find out how much mono and poly and saturated? So I'm going back, saturated fat. It'll tell me that the bean and cheese burrito has 7.6 grams. So I'm going to write that in. And mono, the bean and cheese burrito had 4.2. I'm going to write that in. And then poly, bean and cheese burrito had 3.3. Okay, then you're going to do the same thing on day 2. So day 2, what was my highest fat? Now, if let's say you had a bean and cheese burrito all 3 days, don't put the bean and cheese burrito 3 times. Find the second highest. We don't need to learn about the same thing because then we're not learning anything. So we want to know like what was high in fat in your diet and then what types of fat does that food have? And the last section is on protein. So I ask just questions about your knowledge about protein. Please read what the dietary guidelines, the recommendations are. I kind of repeat it here, what the RDA is, what kind of the UL, what we shouldn't go over, the upper limit. In this case, it's still 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So we're always using weight with protein. You'll answer this. And then question 17, I say calculate your weight and show me, or your weight in kilograms and show the calculation because I want to make sure it's accurate. So if I weigh 150 pounds, I am going to divide that by 2.2 and then I'll use my calculator to do that and then I'll type in my answer there. So 150 divided by 2.2 is 68.2 kilograms. Always put units and always show your work. Okay, so the next question says calculate your RDA. Use the RDAs from above and show your work. So RDA is calculated using your weight in kilograms. So my weight in kilograms was 62.8 kilograms. I get to choose what amount of protein I want. This is what we recommend. 0.8 grams per kilogram for average adults. So if I, sedentary, don't do a lot of movement, light exercise, I would use zero point 0.8. So I would put 0.8 grams per kilo. But if I am very active, then you could go up to 1 gram. If I'm an athlete, you can use the range for endurance and power athletes, 1.2 to 1.8. It's up to you which one you use. So let's say I am just a sedentary light activity person. I would take my weight in kilos and multiply it by 0.8. That equals 54.5 grams of protein. That's how much I need every day. Now, if you go to your nutrient averages report, you would write down what your grams were every day. So let's say I had 56 and I'm on like a really protein diet and I have a lot of supplements, I'm really trying to get more protein in, I have 77.3 as my average. So that was from your days, your calculations. Then the next question says, how many grams of protein are you eating per kilogram of weight? We said you need zero point 0.8. How many are you actually getting? To do that, you would take what you eat, 77.3 grams, the average, that was the calculation that we just did, divide it by your weight, 68.2 kilos, and that will tell me how many grams per kilo you actually have. So 77.3 divided by 68.2, that is 1.13 grams per kilo. Use your units. Is that too much? Well, it's more than zero point 0.8, it's more than your RDA. Then you would be answering, well, I only need zero point 0.8 grams and I'm getting 1.13. I might be getting a little too much protein, probably because I take a protein supplement and I use 2 scoops and that's an extra 30 grams. Maybe I should only use one. So we're thinking about based on how much you need, are you getting too much or are you not eating enough? Some people just may not be getting enough protein. I've highlighted how you're going to use your food diaries and that nutrient averages sheet to work on this section. And then some of it is just information that you've learned. You show me that you learned. Where does fiber come from? What foods are high in fiber? Where's my added sugar coming from? What should I get rid of? What about my protein? Is it too much? So these are the things I want you to start to think about. Okay, thank you.